Well, let's go ahead and get started. Please know this is an intimate session. It is very tactical, meaning we hope you ask questions. So you know the two panelists very well, and I hand over the mic and then I'm done. So I am excited to introduce you to people you probably already know well. Our Vice President of Delivery at Possip, that's Jennifer Kehl, and our relationship manager, Jasmine Blue. You work closely with both of them, and if you haven't gotten to know them yet, trust that they are working closely behind the scenes on your account and in your world. So super excited to hand it off, and I'll do so now.
That's terrific. Great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Great. Thanks for handing that off, Caitlin. We're super excited to be here with all of you today. And as Caitlin mentioned, it is action-packed, so we're going to dive right in. But please feel free to comment, ask questions in the chat. So our goal today is to help you get the most out of your Possip data and insights by covering why and how those insights can be shared out with your community and stakeholders. So we're going to walk through three main components of sharing your insights. First, we'll share some common communication goals that can be well supported with your Possip data. Then we'll discuss different data points from your Possip work and how they can be used to address each of those goals. And we'll show you some examples and tips literally from inside the platform. And then finally, but importantly, we'll highlight some tools and tactics and share actual real life examples of how some of our partners have kind of put that story or that communication of Possip data out into their community. So with that, what are some of the common communication goals that we see? Next slide. So the great thing about Possip is that because we ask your families or staff or students for praise, it lends itself really, really well to positive PR, be that internal or external as a communication goal. So on the internal side, we often see things like just recognition on a one-to-one basis for your staff as a goal. On the external side, Possip data can be used to really showcase your organization and all the wonderful things that you're doing to both current and potential future families. And then more tactically on the PR side, Possip data can support communication initiatives around things like Teacher Appreciation Week and National Principals Month. Another goal of sharing Possip data is to close the feedback loop, to communicate to your stakeholders what you are learning through your Possip engagement so that they know they're being heard, and hopefully they can better understand how you're using their feedback. And if you attended some of the sessions earlier today, which it sounds like many of you have, which is great, including the session on open feedback systems, you've already heard just like how important it is to sort of close that communication loop and share back your Possip data in this way. So then sort of the other two objectives that I haven't covered yet on the right-hand side, we see that Possip data can be shared out with your community to just show how you make decisions based on input and data. And we'll spotlight a couple examples of that. And then last, but definitely not least, sharing insights from and about your Possip data can just showcase the impact of the program overall. And by doing that, you're really showing how you're engaging with your community. One of the most common audiences for this kind of story is your board, right? To be able to share with them just what you're doing. And we've got some tips on the recommended data points for doing that. So hopefully these resonate with you. These are going to be sort of our organizing principle for today. We're going to go through thinking about each of those objectives and what data can be used to support it. Let us know in the chat if you've used Possip data in these ways or if there's other usages that come to mind. And so now that I've set the stage, we're going to actually show how to bring examples to life with data. And I'm going to ask Jasmine to share the first couple.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So like Jen just mentioned, a big part of Possip is helping you surface positive praise for your school or district. And as we know, sometimes negative voices seem like the loudest, but because Possip helps you hear praise, more often than not, our partners find that they have more praise comments and feedback comments at the end of the year, and even well before then. And so the number of praise comments is a really strategic and helpful statistic that you can share with your stakeholders and community. And it's also something that's great to compare to the number of feedback comments, and it's readily available to you directly in Possip. Another great positive PR point that we always like to highlight are our highlight quotes and wow praise comments. And so these are direct comments from your parents, staff, or students that you've noticed most likely in your report or your district report. And they're amazing to highlight, like Jen said, one-on-one or in other public facing ways. But these are quotes that you can easily email or copy out to make sure that you're sharing them with your community, all for positive PR. Another main goal that we've touched on briefly is closing the feedback loop. And so when it comes to closing that loop, it's helpful to share a high-level perspective with parents, staff, or students and what they're saying. And so the total feedback comments is in your Possip dashboard as well. And this just helps illuminate what the primary feedback areas were throughout the school year. And so it might be operations, which could include car line or the building or school schedules or academics, teachers and staff, and more. And so year over year, this is a really interesting stat to look at if you've been with us for multiple years, but also like previously mentioned, we typically see that our partners have more praise and feedback comments. And so it's interesting to compare those stats across school years too. And then in addition to thinking about the overall feedback comments and what categories they're in, it's also helpful to get a little more granular by looking at trends and recommendations in your reports. And these can help you know what are the trending topics in our school community? What are the things that multiple parents, staff, or students are talking about? And this is just helpful to help people understand, what are other people talking about? And then also how are we addressing the things that most people are talking about? So that is also available to you in your Possip report or your school dashboard, and something that we can help you surface and find too. So I'll pass it back to Jen to talk through the other communications goals.
Great. Thanks, Jasmine. One of the things I like, just thinking back to, and I posted this in the chat, to the examples that Jasmine already shared, is that like we surfaced through Possip this like great combination of sort of quantitative and qualitative feedback. And I think sort of the use of bonus questions to make and showcase data-driven decisions is just another example of that. So yes, actually, you can use some of the trends that Jasmine was just talking about to share out with your community and, talk about how those trends might be informing decisions that you're making. But bonus questions really provide an additional layer of flexibility so that you can really ask very tactical questions and get results in a clear, quantified way, as you can sort of see here on the screen. This particular example with a bit of a multiple choice about interest in topics for workshops. We see all kinds of questions that partners use and we analyze for you on things like changes to the school calendar or how to improve parent-teacher conferences, or even what kinds of programs would help improve staff engagement. And so we quantify those results, whether that's a multiple choice question or even an open-ended one, so that you can really show like the power of numbers. And then you could always dig into the comments to share specific commentary from your community that supported your decision. Okay, so then the last, but still very important communication goal that we had highlighted is this idea of showcasing the overall impact of the program. And certainly everything we've talked about so far, right? Praise comments, like actual praise verbatims, feedback trends, and even bonus questions can be used to showcase the program impact. But there's a couple other statistics that we think are really important to fully bringing that story to life and really showing the full way in which you're engaging with your community. And the first of those are quantitative stats around engagement, or sort of said otherwise, like how many voices you are hearing from. So this is one example of how this information is surfaced in the platform, where you can really see sort of that cumulative build of total voices. So like, what are the unique people that you're hearing from, be that family or staff, depending on how you're working with us. And hopefully also be able to show that that engagement is building over time, right? Which can be really impactful in terms of telling your Possip and your listening story. The next example that we have is a little bit about kind of maybe why it is that you're reaching so many people. It showcases that you're making it easy for your community to respond. And so there's a couple ways to think about doing that. The example that you see here is languages. So sharing data about how many families are responding in another language really shows that you're removing potential barriers, right, to hearing from all of the voices that are relevant to you. Similarly, in cases where maybe language, isn't as compelling or interesting for you and your community, you can also share how many of your families are responding via text. It's a really unique way that you're allowing families to provide feedback, and another good way of highlighting the breadth of input that you're getting. And then last, but definitely not least, like we often recommend and see that partners are just sharing some sort of an overview of sentiment, right? So how are your families feeling? How is your staff feeling? And you can do that either using sort of the cumulative number over the course of your engagement so far, or you can do some comparisons, right? So I could look at how many families are happy right now, and how does that perhaps compare to the last pulse check, the last period in time. And we're often able to give you helpful insight on how that might compare to what we're seeing nationally, right? So we do know that there's some trends just in how folks feel, right? As fall sort of runs on and we get into winter, it's generally true that families are a little bit less happy, right? And so we're always we're always able to provide that input to all of you to put some context around these numbers. Okay, so we spent some time showing data points, and now we want to kind of put that into action and actually spotlight real life examples of how partners have achieved some of these communication goals with Possip data. And I'm going to pass it back to Jasmine to kick this off.
Yeah. So starting with positive PR, it's something that can, be summarized in reports and more formally at the end of the school year if you do an annual report of sorts. However, we also like to think of positive PR as low-hanging fruit just because it can be shared out easily and routinely. And so one great example comes from our school partner in Metro Nashville Public Schools, Inglewood Elementary. They've used Possip parent quotes to celebrate their teachers publicly on their social media. And this just helps the teachers feel appreciated and shows the broader community their celebratory culture as a school and how much they value their staff. In a similar but slightly different vein, Rockwood Preparatory in Oregon has a parent perspectives page, which spotlights positive parent comments, including ones from Possip. And so this just helps show school visitors, the community, and people who would just happen to be on their website what real families are saying about their school. And so I like these examples, especially because they are, routine things that can be updated and shared out in the broader community to just show the positive culture at your school and to celebrate your people. So curious if there are any other ways that you all are sharing out praise. Would love to hear about it in the chat. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next option. And so another goal that we've talked about is closing the feedback loop. And when it comes to closing the feedback loop, if you're a Possip 360 partner, you might be familiar with something called your Possip 360 script. And this is something in the Possip platform that helps summarize what families or staff or students are saying in the report. And so we pulled an example from Olentangy High School. They do a really great job of using the Possip 360 script directly on their website, where parents can see what people are saying, what the praises were, what the feedback was. And they also take it a step further by adding an FAQ. And so this FAQ can be in response to maybe those trending comments that we saw, in the slides earlier, or any other kinds of feedback they want to address more publicly so that multiple parents can see what they're doing to address that need. And so this is just another great example of closing the feedback loop and making sure that you're responding to the pulse check collectively. And I'll also add that, say if there's someone who maybe never responded to the pulse check before, but they were to see this page, this would help them know that, hey, these people are actually responding and paying attention to what's being said, and just reinforce the value of the feedback. Thanks, Caitlin.
Love that, Jasmine. Yeah, I love how transparent, many of our partners are with Possip data, and the fact that, it might be more obvious how sharing the positive can make your community feel positively about your organization, but even being transparent about the feedback, right? It just shows that you're listening and acting on what your community is saying. And so this is another example. So I had talked earlier about the idea of using bonus questions to really address very specific questions and get input that you can act on. And then, you want to let your community know that you heard them and you're taking their input into consideration. And so this is an example from Baltimore City Public Schools. They use Possip data for a variety of district level decisions. And this visual is literally from information that they make available to their whole community. And it clearly shows the feedback they received and explained how the data was used, right? So they make this available as part of a broader set of results that include a number of different survey questions that they've asked. And so for me, as a family member, it's easy for me to kind of go in and see. And I think that really says a lot about the transparency of the organization. And it also allows me to understand a little bit about what decisions might be being made. So I think this is like a really great example. Okay. And then to bring it all home, I wanted to showcase a bit of a sort of template that might provide inspiration for how you really can communicate all of the elements of your program and showcase its impact. So we've talked about a lot of different kinds of data today. And I sort of mentioned this idea of the combination of sort of qualitative and quantitative. And this template is designed to blend those two kinds of insights for you if you want to share out, for example, with your board. So this is the kind of thing that a number of our partners we know use for their board discussions. It is easy and digestible, right? It's only sort of 2-ish pages, but really runs the gamut of covering everything from those like key statistics, which you see on the left-hand side, right? How many pulse checks have you done? How many voices have you heard from? What proportion of your community does that represent, right? So that response rate. And how are folks feeling? So like it very highlights sort of very clearly that sort of quantitative fast facts. And then starts to get in a little bit more to some of the, I guess, why or what behind those numbers. For example, sharing what the top trends have been, and we can provide or kind of show you where to get on our website sort of the national trends. So again, you're providing some context on how what you're hearing is maybe similar or different from what Possip is like seeing across all of our partners nationally. And then the second page digs even a little bit further into the data, showing some praise comments. We are big fans of making sure that praise gets elevated because it's such an important indication of all the good work going on in your organizations. Spotlighting bonus questions, if there's any that you've done that you think will be really impactful for, again, your board or stakeholders to be aware of. And then sharing that data that I mentioned earlier that really shows just how you're making it easy to hear from a truly diverse set of voices. And that can be information on language data, or on the proportion of families that are responding via text. So this is like intended to be a little bit inspirational. If you're a 360 partner, we help put together these kinds of summaries for you. And we'll be sharing after the session just some like resources and links to our help desk. And we'll make sure that something like this is available to you all. It's just like, hey, what would we recommend if it were just like a quick but impactful summary of like all of the key data? That's what you see here. So to summarize, we've covered sort of 4 goals that we've seen a lot of our partners use Possip data to support. The positive PR examples that Jasmine talked about, this idea of kind of sharing how many praise comments you're getting, really sharing that that's oftentimes well more than any feedback comments, using the specific mentions from either parents or staff members to recognize people or just to showcase in more detail some of the qualitative commentary around sort of great work. We covered the idea of closing the feedback loop, of what kinds of data can be surfaced, and like the Olentangy example about how it's being surfaced to be really sort of transparent with the community and kind of show them what you're hearing and maybe what you're doing with that information. We talked a little bit about the idea of highlighting when and how decisions are being made very overtly based on input and data, and using those sort of bonus question results, not just to guide the decisions, but to put back out there into the community that you've done that. And then lastly, the idea of like how, what's an easy way to showcase program impact overall? What are the things that, we think are recommended to consider sharing if you're putting together, a summary for your board or other similar stakeholders. So with that, I wanted to just sort of reinforce the resources that are available to ideate around some of what we've shared today, to sort of walk through where to find some of these things in the platform. And so we have a great combination of both sort of self-study and actual people that are more than happy to support you in, how do I use my Possip data to really achieve different communication goals, and get the most out of it as possible.
Thank you so much, Jen and Jasmine. We have a few minutes, maybe like 3 minutes. So I was going to actually just pose a couple questions to you guys, if that's all right.
Love it.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. And I just wanted to ask, let's say that I am a Possip partner on this call, or maybe this is my first year with Possip. You provided so many great tactics. Is there a tactic I should leverage first? Is there like a high leverage tactic or a place to lean in, or how do I think about it?
I honestly think the highlight quotes are honestly the most high leverage and most transformative, perhaps initially, just because I know when you're first starting out something like Possip or taking in feedback, you might be nervous about, negative feedback or constructive feedback, but getting those praise comments and making sure that the rest of the school is aware of them is something that I think is really great to leverage as soon as possible. And like I said before, something that can be used routinely throughout the year. Don't have to wait till Teacher Appreciation Week, but can take advantage of that from the start. So I think starting with some positive PR is a really great way to just put a good foot forward and let people know that they're celebrated.
That's awesome. Jen, anything you want to add?
It's a twofer. I mean, I'm just going to jump on the sort of positive praise comment bandwagon, right? It's a twofer because they're like, right, that person or that department sort of internally, right, gets the love. But it also, particularly if you're sharing it externally, right, like your families will see it, whether they're current families or maybe not yet families, right, that might be whatever moving or considering coming into your district. So I think it's great that it does two things at the same time, and they're often I don't know, just really lovely, right? And that sort of qualitative depth of like hearing literally in the words of your community. So I think that, that's a big one. And then, just some of the measures maybe around like breadth of engagement, just like how many voices you're hearing from, I think can be really impactful, both again, internally to sort of reassure or communicate with your teams, but also externally, right? So that like families know, how much input you all are getting.
And right away, it kind of blasts two myths, which is that feedback is always negative. We know from our data that that's not true. And also the myth, that the same people keep sharing, which are two common myths that come up. So those two help. And there's been definitely a theme of the day. Really emphasize the good. It is more prevalent in your data. We have a way of devaluing the good and like skipping to the negative. So just emphasizing the good and starting with positive PR. Thank you for offering that. And then last question for you all. If I want to remember all these tactics, what do I do next? Is there a place I go? Is there a person I go to?
Yeah. So definitely, Jasmine, I don't know if you're going to.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate, like myself, my colleague Bonnie, which you just saw on the support slides, here to support you alongside our colleague Lucas. But also the help desk is a great spot, and we will be sharing as part of the post-event email and resources a help article that just kind of aggregates different links that can help you do positive PR, that can help you close the feedback loop. And so that'll be a really great resource to use and to consider when you're trying to implement these strategies throughout the year.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to close us out then with a last slide or two. And that is just to say that if you loved what you've been hearing today, if you're finding a lot of value from the Possip community, we want to announce something new that we're doing that we think is going to bring even more value to the community. We are excited to announce that Possip is launching a membership for our educator community. There's 5,000 educators in our network. And once you think about those people representing 1,400 schools, we know that that just compounds. There's more and more people that we can provide as resources. So we're going to hold space for all of the collective wisdom and talent and collaboration. And we're proud to announce that we'll be launching a membership. It will help you grow as a professional through curated content and events. It'll also help you find talent through a job board and opportunities, so we can hire within the Possip network and really begin to lean on each other's co-creation and these lessons that we've learned along the way. And then finally, you'll just have access to the membership directory. You'll be able to see who does similar work to me that can be a resource to me, and Possip will help with those connections. So we are excited to share more, and just stay tuned for that. And then last, just thanking all of the people who have really tuned in today. So many of you have returned all day, and that's so great. There's one final session around communication strategies. Basically, we are going to dive deep into a particular set of data. Jasmine and Jen have just given us the breadth of data that we can repetitively lean into. And we're going to look at what does the data say around one particular trend, communications, and what can we learn from it. We'll have some panelists reflecting on the trends that have come through about what families want from comms and how they respond to those. So that begins at 2:15 here shortly, and that's our last session for the day. Thank you, everyone who joined. We really appreciate you.